Cool. It says we're live. So, welcome everybody. We are here with Morgan for our installment of creating great relationships in business. And for those of you that are just watching for the first time, this series has been about what happens if social media goes down and when your business still thrive. And so a lot of these installments have been on meeting people, creating relationships, how to enroll clients. And what we have Morgan here to talk about today, she'll share more about what she does. But I know what happened for me in the past and still occasionally comes up is sometimes we have a lot of fear, or we self-sabotage, or we find that we're chasing someone who's not interested in us. And so it's all about breaking that pattern, this conversation. So Morgan, welcome. And yeah, I'll let you take it away. I'll let you introduce yourself, share people with what you do and where they can find you as well after this.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me today. I'm super excited. So my name is Morgan Danielle, and I'm a relationship coach. I help women break the toxic relationship cycle and attract the high value partnership that they want. And so, or that they desire, what they've been desiring. And a lot of what you just mentioned is exactly what I see in my clients. And I've definitely seen an overlap in the way it transpires in business as well as in relationships. So I'm really psyched to chat about it today.
Cool. Yeah, me too. Just so people know, where should they find you? Where should they look you up if they're called to do more of that?
Yeah, I'm mostly on Facebook. My name's Morgan Danielle on Facebook. I have a Facebook group that is called Break the Cycle. And I also have an Instagram handle that's _Morgan Danielle.
Cool. Perfect. And I'll make sure I tag all that for everyone. Cool. So I think this is really exciting, right? Because, you have amazing posts. You really help women with a lot of these things. And I know the posts aren't for me, but I just
really still enjoy them.
Right. I really enjoyed them. And I was like, wow, so much of this really comes up for, clients. And I see people in business who feel like what they desire, what they want, either isn't working out or isn't happening, or sometimes they have all these feelings that come up. When you meet with someone, maybe they're sharing these different things. Where do you recommend, like, if they aren't creating what they want, and so they're sort of creating what they don't want, or they keep finding themselves in that, where do you recommend someone start? Where do you recommend they look first?
Yeah, I love this question because it all stems back to our traditional patterning that relates back to our childhood. Everything that we have in our life right now is exactly what our subconscious actually wants. So even though it's not what our conscious mind wants, it's exactly what the subconscious mind wants. And so I like to take my clients back to the root cause. Where is this stemming from? Where do these insecurities come from? Where do these limiting beliefs come from? And it's typically created between ages 0 and 7, at least for relationships. And a lot of our core beliefs and our limiting beliefs stem from that childhood age.
Mm-hmm. And that's amazing, right? How like just that period of time and that conditioning, right, can sort of be what we knew at the time, and that's sort of what we're operating off of. So it sounds like this is really the start to upgrading it, right? That it's got us where we are now, and we're wanting something different. So for someone that, maybe they aren't in a program, or maybe they aren't with a therapist, what should they really look for in terms of during this time period? Is there a way for them to become aware of just what the pattern or like the conditioning was, to catch it or keep a lookout for it, to help unhook from it?
Yeah, I think the best thing that they can do when they don't have somebody from the outside kind of reflecting these things back to them, looking at what they've created in their life. Where do they see the connections? Where do they see patterns that they've been forming with clients or relationships? Have they seen a consistent pattern of clients who don't pay on time, or that cross their boundaries? Things like that. It's like, once you start to see a pattern of what's actually going on, we can say, okay, where is this coming from? And getting just very curious about where could this be coming from? Where have I seen this before? Where have I felt this before? Because what happens is our subconscious will continuously seek out people and experiences that mirrors what we had gone through or how we had felt back in childhood. And so we continue to recreate these experiences over and over. And so when we can start just taking a magnifying glass to what's going on right now in our life and where have we seen it before, where have we felt it before, then it's like we can start kind of connecting those dots and kind of creating like this web of where these things are coming from, because self-awareness is the catalyst for change. If we don't know, what's happening or the patterns, or, we've kind of been on autopilot, then we can't really change them. So awareness is the biggest piece to start with.
Yeah, and I think, oh my gosh, you're covering so many amazing things. When you were talking about clients not paying on time, I think you have a post, maybe multiple posts on red flags, right? Like things to look out for. So in terms of business and clients and just what they're operating with, what are some red flags that maybe, because sometimes people don't know any different, right? So someone might say, oh, this is just how it is. So it might be helpful for us to just identify some red flags. It sounds like one of them is clients not paying on time, that being one of them. Is there anything else that comes to mind that you think they should look out for?
Specifically in business?
Yeah. And well, let's do two parts. It could be, we could start with business, and then, I guess all business is created through relationships. Mm-hmm. And so maybe red flags and just relationships. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can speak on, so when it comes to like what I've experienced personally, that is when like somebody crosses your boundaries or they're not receptive. Say you're talking to, a potential client, and you're wanting to ask them some questions, and they're not willing to open up to you. They're not willing to, ask the questions before maybe you hop on a call. Mm-hmm. I've experienced that personally. And usually if they're not willing to kind of meet me halfway in that way and answer some questions and open up, then they're not a good fit. And so I've seen that. And then in relationships, it's crossing boundaries, people that aren't respectful of your time, people that are disrespectful to you, or they are, I'm trying to think of the red flags. I just made a post on this.
Yeah.
When you notice, and I'm not sure if it relates exactly to what you see in business with potential clients, but like showing up in integrity. I think that those are two things that overlap a lot. Like when I think about relationships and I talk to my clients about high value partnership, a green flag to look for is, does somebody show up in integrity? Do they say do they do what they say they're going to do? Do they follow through? And I think that that's a big thing that we can see with our clients, especially when, it comes to payment, when it comes to taking action, is do they say, or do they do what they say they're going to do? And if not, if you've noticed a repeated pattern of not following through, that's a major red flag in both areas to be extremely aware of.
Yeah, and I was writing down a few of these as you were talking, and so that first one, right, where you spoke about someone taking action. Maybe you're trying to have a conversation or you're engaging with the person, and so it's this idea that the red flag is if someone is not really showing the same faith or meeting you halfway. And so I like this idea that it's a healthy connection. It's a healthy relationship if the person's reciprocating, right? They're literally relating, right? Relationship, the process of relating.
Yeah. I've had somebody in Messenger tell me like, I'm not going to answer these questions. Like, just call me. And I was like, that crosses my boundary because I'm not open to that. If you want to continue with this conversation, then this is what we do first in order to get to that next step. And so, if you set that boundary and they continue to cross it, major red flag. Some people don't know until you tell them that boundary. And so that's kind of how you can see it. I'm sure that so many people here that are watching this have experienced that as well. And then they get on the call and then it's not ideal. It's not an ideal fit.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And there are a few people saying hello. So I don't know if you see the comments.
No, I can't see anything.
Okay. And yeah, so I think this is actually a cool point to dive into, because I think especially with the things that come up for people when they're running their business, they're wanting to lead it their way. And so as they engage with people, there may be someone like you said, that says, oh, I'm not going to answer these questions or just do this. And I think that can probably bring up lots of feelings for people where they're like, you know, it can almost be like a sadness or triggered in some way because they're trying to run their business and there's someone else saying, I'm not going to do things your way, or I'm not going to do the way that you want it. And so they're not surrounding themselves, but almost from what I've witnessed, the experience is like they almost feel powerless in the sense of, this is how I want to run my business, but this person doesn't want to do this. And so I feel lost on what to do.
Yeah. And I noticed also like people pleasing, where they're willing to bend over backwards to, instead of leading the conversation or leading in certain ways, they're willing to, you know, kind of abandon themselves, abandon their boundaries in order to make somebody sign up with them or to like them, or they hide parts about themselves in order to try to, you know, gain a client or get somebody, you know, in a relationship to want to be with them. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, this is really cool. And so it's this, they're breaking their own boundaries or their own, you know, self-agreements in the way that they want something to do, because they, what would you say? Is it that they're I think I've always put it in the phrase of like, they're putting themselves secondary to others.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you talk a little more about that on just ways that, and obviously whatever comes to you, but I'm thinking ways that you see that show up, and maybe a shift that they could make, and it might feel new for them. Yeah, let's do that.
So I love that you asked this question, because it comes from an unworthiness wound. When we don't feel like we are good enough, or if we don't feel like we're worthy, then we're going to break our boundaries, or we're not going to have boundaries to begin with, because we're constantly trying to gain worthiness from external sources. And so this client signing this client or getting this client to like me or sign up with me will give me worthiness. It'll make me feel good enough. And same thing in relationships. It's, if I can just please this person, if I can just bend over backwards, they'll see how amazing I am, and then they'll want to be with me. And so what this comes down to is self-abandonment due to feeling unworthy. If you feel like you had 100% self-esteem, if you felt 100% worthy, then you would only, like, you wouldn't be settling for crumbs. You wouldn't be settling for people who don't honor you and respect you. You would only, if somebody didn't abide by your boundaries, you'd be like, okay, this person isn't a good fit for me. I don't choose them. We're always wanting everyone to choose us, but do we choose them? I know that there's a lot of people that I work with, a lot of entrepreneurs, and they've signed clients that they don't want to sign because they want to be chosen. But I always ask, well, do you choose them? Did you think that they were a good fit for you? And a lot of the times it's a no, but that external validation is what they're aiming for. And so what we have to do in order to stop doing that is we have to recognize our worth. We have to recognize that we bring so much to the table, and there are an abundance of people out there who are going to love us and respect us for exactly who we are, who will find our boundaries wildly sexy and find our boundaries, really, like, just they respect that, and they find that honorable to have those boundaries. They look up to you because you have them. And so that's what we have to start doing is setting those boundaries, because if we think about it, every time somebody crosses our boundaries, our self-worth gets lower and goes down a notch and goes down a notch. But when we can set stable boundaries and people actually abide by those, you recognize your self-worth begins to grow, your confidence begins to grow. That was something that I struggled with deeply, early on, was a lack of boundaries, because I didn't think that I was worthy of having them. I didn't feel good enough. And so I was willing to abandon myself in order to please everyone else. And so making that huge shift, created abundance in my love life and with my partner, and abundance in my business as well.
Yeah. Wow. I just love how you laid that out, and really, because I think those listening, they probably really relate to this in wanting to please those other people, or get their approval to be chosen. And so what are some ways that they could start, I guess, having their own approval first? Because I imagine, as this shift happens, I think it can feel very confronting, right? Because they're so used to just, letting something go. And when I say letting something go, it's like just kind of, dismissing themselves and saying, oh, that this is okay. And it's really not okay to them. I imagine they just either don't have the words to communicate it, or the feeling can be so great. What would a new communication look like, or what would a new step look like, so they have an idea of what could be different?
Yeah. And so when we're thinking about like dismissing, certain experiences that don't feel good, and you're wanting to be treated a different way, what it comes down to is this fear of rejection, right? Like if I set a boundary, or if I show my true self, then I'll get rejected. And so I have to kind of abandon myself in order to not get rejected and get accepted. And so what we have to, the shifts that we have to start making in that is we can never really be rejected. Like the right people will always, when we're showing up as the fullest expression of ourselves, when we love and accept ourselves deeply, then the right people will show up. We won't have to convince, we won't have to manipulate. The right people will always show up. And so it always comes down to that internal work of showing up totally transparent, and being who we are, accepting all parts of ourselves, and not being afraid to show that to others. And if they reject us, then that means that we're making room for the people who will accept us and love us for who we are. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that I definitely think that makes sense. A question that I would have there is, how can they differentiate between someone that maybe disagrees with them or disagrees with a thought, versus someone that's not respecting them? I think because sometimes that can be like clumped together, I think, for people.
Yeah, and I think the foundation of relationships always comes down to effective communication. And so just like in partnership, you can have disagreements with your partner, but it's the way that you do it. It's the words that you say. It's how you say it. And so people can absolutely have fundamental differences, right? They can have differences in the way that they think and feel and do things. Mm-hmm. But it's how do we say these things? Are they being rude and condescending, or are they respecting our perspective in the way that we operate, and either willing to compromise or go separate directions in that area, like agree to disagree, and go in that way? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. I think if it's helpful for anyone, the way that I've thought of this. Because Ellie and I go to a relationship therapist. We've been going to her for maybe 3 years. We're like, it's just like maintenance now. And so I'm like, everyone should have someone.
I agree.
And one of the things that she and I talk about is if we're ever in a disagreement, we don't want to say anything unkind. As long as we're not, over the top, as long as we're not, disparaging the other person, it may feel uncomfortable to communicate, right, what's true for us or what's present. It's just the barometer can be, I don't want to be unkind to the person.
Yeah.
And kind is like, the words that you use, how you're saying it. And so it sounds like it goes back the other way. Is the other person being respectful? Are they being considerate?
Mm-hmm.
And that goes with, showing up on time, doing what they say they're going to do.
Yeah.
And all of those things. So I think that definitely ties together. And what I'd love to do, because I realize sometimes there can be people who are maybe in the coaching world or they've looked at a lot of this stuff, and then sometimes there's people who maybe this is new to them. How do you share with them what I probably should have done this a little earlier, but how do you share with them what like a boundary is? Because I feel like we probably have a good sense of this.
Yeah.
But it might be new for someone, this idea of an invisible boundary.
Mm-hmm.
What does that really mean for them?
Yeah, so boundaries is like a huge portion of what I teach because it is so crucial and such an incredible act of self-love. And so I didn't even know what boundaries were up until, a few years ago when someone had been like, oh, like healthy boundaries. It's like, you mean that I don't have to do what everyone else wants me to do and I can say no? So having a boundary is really just this imaginary line that separates yourself from somebody else. And it's what you're willing to tolerate and what you're not willing to tolerate. And so a great boundary, that can be a good example is if somebody is requesting a lot of your time and you have felt bad in the past saying no. And so you would continuously go above and beyond for this other person. And they're asking you to do this favor for them or be there for them in a certain way that you don't want to be. You can simply say like, hey, I understand that this is what you'd like me to do, but I'm not available for that right now. So, we can use, just that kind of language. I know that boundaries in friendships, what you're willing to share, what you're not willing to share, how much time you're willing to spend with somebody. A big boundary for my boyfriend and I is that we don't talk about our relationship in any kind of negative way with our friends or family. Mm-hmm. And so that's a big boundary that we've put into place. And so it's what you're willing to tolerate and not willing to tolerate.
Yeah, I love that, and that's that is actually a beautiful boundary. That is one that Ellie and I actually have as well. Because if you want to work on something, disparaging another person or speaking unkindly about them, especially to other people, it's like at least our perception is when you're actually doing the work, you're able to talk about it directly with the person.
Exactly. And one for business that I've set with my clients is I don't respond on the weekends. So if they message me on the weekends or something like that, they know that I will not respond. That's a boundary I've set for myself and for them, or working past my designated hours or something along those lines. So, being able to communicate to your clients when they can have access to you, how much access they can have to you. You're not there to save them or do the work for them, but rather support them in that way. And also in relationships, you're not there to be there, there's boundaries in your time in relationships as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think it's also helpful for people to know that boundaries are these things that can continually evolve, right? Because just as our purpose or anything can change throughout life, what we tolerate and don't tolerate can change. And so, I think that's a beautiful example with clients, and it can be, when answering messages and what, because what they're actually doing is, not necessarily, they aren't letting the other person down. They're actually just being clear for others of how they operate, like the way that they work. And so that gives people the option to opt in or opt out of that. And things actually become a lot clearer, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that I've seen a lot, like people are scared to set boundaries because they're like, well, what if I set this boundary and this person rejects me for it, or they leave, or they don't, they don't abide by it. And it's like, we have to be okay with that uncomfortableness. We have to be okay with that rejection, because that's, again, just creating space for the people who love your boundaries and will respect them and value you more because of them.
Yeah, and I know that's one of the things that we spoke about, is this fear of rejection.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you probably have your own teachings on this. I remember I had a coach that he told me that rejection doesn't only exist; it's just a concept in my mind.
Yeah, that's exactly what I teach.
yeah. I mean, it's because it's not like someone's going, "I reject you," right? It's these moments in life where someone is, they're not into that, or they think it should be a different way. And if this idea that they're, rejecting us, it's, it can feel very debilitating, I think, for people.
Yeah.
And, I think, and I'll let you share, I know what helped me was, really seeing that it wasn't a rejection that I was feeling. It was just like, I had a hope that something was going to work.
Yeah.
Or and then I just had to be like, I experienced some disappointment. It doesn't mean I was dead. It didn't mean anything like that. It was just some disappointment I was experiencing. And I know for some people that can be really intense and something that they're working through. How do you recommend they handle rejection, to actually have a process or something to start off with? They're sharing this boundary. They have this idea of rejection in the background, or these feelings that are coming up. How do you recommend that they handle that or work through that?
Yeah, reframing what rejection means to them. So these rejection wounds, again, they come from, our childhood and what we've experienced. And it's through those childhood experiences, we created these stories about what rejection means for us. And so rejection means we're not good enough, we're not lovable, something along those lines. And so we have to actually look at the story that we have around rejection and reframe it. I used to really struggle with the fear of rejection. And once I reframed it to be like, okay, rejection means nothing about me. This person choosing a different path, that means absolutely nothing about me. I can take the personalness out of it, and rejection is only redirection. I can put this in an example as far as relationships. When I think about all of the, really toxic and abusive relationships that I had been in, and it was so painful to have these people reject me in the ways that they did. Now that I'm on the other side of that and I have a healthy, loving relationship with my partner, I now see that the universe was protecting me in that way. And rejection is actually protection. Rejection is redirection. So it's whenever a door closes, that means that something better is on its way to you. And we have to have trust that that's going to happen. And we can actually stack up evidence of where that's been true. So if you got rejected by a date or a client, did that mean that there was someone better for you down the line? Did that mean that a better client that was a better fit, that could possibly even pay you more money, is down the line? So that's the way that we begin to reframe and take action in the different direction of fear, and start reprogramming our minds around this different meaning of rejection.
Yeah, I love that. And I really do think it shows up in these these different ways, because as they have these boundaries and they hold their boundary, they're just honest of what they really want, what works for them and what doesn't. And simultaneously, sharing what one wants doesn't mean that you're rejecting them.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think it's really cool, because what's happening through this whole process is they're getting more aligned with what is actually better for them. Because if there isn't that clarity, then there isn't clarity for that new thing or what's better to actually arrive when they're clear of, whether it's here's the price or this is how I operate. It's actually making the space for those things to happen faster, because otherwise, I know for me, when I've worked with clients in the past who maybe either weren't the best fit, or I was just trying to get them, or I was letting my own boundaries go. It took up a lot of mental energy. It took up a lot of mental emotion. I didn't actually even have the space or the awareness to see what was there, what was possibly there for me. There was only a sense that what was there was lost.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'll focusing on the lack, right?
Yeah. Focus on the lack. Yeah. And so as they do this, as they become clear, as they have this redirection, and they're wanting to open up and really have this space to just let whatever enter, whether that's clients or whether that's people that they're connecting with. Is there anything that you notice that happens in that process? Because I imagine as this new pattern is forming, it's really easy to go back into the old pattern because there can be fear that arises or just uncomfortable, unpleasant things.
Yeah. And so what, are you asking like what to do when you notice those patterns falling back into old patterns, or?
Okay. So I think it's a two-parter. One would be, what are the things that you notice start to happen in the process in terms of them maybe having cold feet on moving forward with this, because maybe they've taken the action, but it's really easy to go back to the pattern.
Got it.
So I guess to be more precise, what do you notice the patterns are of people that maybe don't see it through right away and they go back? How to catch themselves?
Yeah. So a lot of what I see, especially in my line of work and in relationship coaching, I see a lot of self-sabotage. So that's when people are really wanting to make this change, and then they start making some action, and then their fear, their ego gets in the way, and they self-sabotage because either they don't think they're worthy of it, they don't think they can hold it, they're scared of losing it. And so they have these behavior patterns that arise, and even it's totally like subconscious. They don't even recognize that they're doing it. And so it's all about like retraining. When you notice this self-sabotage coming into play, like nipping it in the bud and saying, hey, I recognize this pattern. This is getting me further away from what I want. This is what I'm going to do instead. And they replace the action with a action that actually does align. So it definitely takes some consistency. It takes a lot of self-awareness, but having like an alternative behavior kind of like in your back pocket, like, oh, I recognize this behavior is here. This is what I'm going to do instead of acting on impulse. But I see that all the time with the self-sabotage that arises. They're doing really, really good. And then they're like, oh shit, it's too good. I could lose this. And then they, subconsciously take an action that will get them back into an old pattern.
Yeah. So this idea that what they're moving towards, right, is like too good, gonna lose it, and then they sabotage. And so, and a lot of it's subconscious. Is there any tip or exercise or practice that you recommend they do, to whether it's some of the things you just described or carving out some time for them to reflect? Is there anything specific that you recommend they try on?
Yeah, I think so. Journaling is like one of the biggest, greatest outlets, I believe. It's something that I've been doing for years, and being able to kind of get your thoughts out on paper, releasing that energy through journaling, and doing a reflection of what are my self-sabotaging patterns? What are my thought patterns around money, clients, business, rejection, relationships, and start defining what these things mean for us. It all stems back to that self-awareness, which is really, really powerful, because when we have the awareness of what's going on, we can start to take that next right action. So I think that journaling is one of the most powerful tools that's easy to do. Well, I guess not always easy. If we have journaling prompts or things like that, or if you've never journaled before, it can be a bit overwhelming. But taking that time to get to know yourself in that way is really important, because I think a lot of us go on autopilot. We're on autopilot all the time, repeating the same patterns, the same thoughts that we've had our entire life. And so when we start to put it down on paper and we can start seeing it like in front of our eyes, then it makes it a whole lot easier to recognize, what's happening and how we got to where we are, right?
Yeah. And for someone that may be new to journaling, or this might be a new practice for them, because I think I know what helped me in this process. I think it really was a simple prompt of, what did I accomplish today? What did I learn today? And acknowledging my growth. I usually did those three things. Yeah. And then where I wanted to move towards. Do you have any particular prompts or anything to give someone something to start with?
Yeah. So when it comes to money or relationships, we can ask ourselves, what is my belief about having X amount of money? What is my belief about having relationships? Because a lot of the time people can have these subconscious beliefs that money is evil, money makes you a bad person, there's a lot of just things that are tied to money. If I have a lot of money, then I won't have time for my family or my friends. And so that can be an internal block that is keeping them from moving forward and actually creating self-sabotaging patterns. And so getting really clear on what your beliefs are, and then what you want your new beliefs to be. And I do that with relationships too, because a lot of people relate relationships to pain. And so when they find they either gravitate towards pain because that's what they expect it to be, or they have something really great and they self-sabotage it because they expect it to be painful. And so we have to decide, get really clear on what that belief is, and then say, what is the new belief? What is the new meaning that I'm giving this? And we also get to kind of play around with what it would feel like to maybe get to that next level, to sign this many clients, to have that relationship. Because when we can cultivate those feelings in our body, our brain doesn't know the difference between fantasy and reality. And so if we can cultivate those feelings before the thing actually happens, before we've received the successful business, before we've received the successful relationship, if we can cultivate that feeling, it brings the reality closer to us, and we're more able to hold it and be comfortable with it because we've done it before.
Wow, that's great. That is, I haven't heard a prompt like that for journaling before. So that I love that, especially just getting, asking yourself, what's the belief, getting it out of our subconscious and our mind, and getting it out on paper. Because I imagine, when going through that process, just seeing what the belief is, I imagine we can look at that and be like, oh, this is
surprising. Yeah, I've created so many journals for my clients, and it's all about getting, having that awareness and the discovery. Because once you realize, oh, my dad used to say that money is the root of all evil. And so that's why every time I've made a $15,000 a month or $20,000 a month, I got in a car accident or I did XYZ. This is just an example. But I've seen this a lot because they believe that the money is the root of all evil. And so having a lot of it would create rejection from dad. It would make you a bad person. So they, again, sabotage their success because of that belief. So when they know what that belief is and where it comes from, it's like, okay, now I see what the pattern is.
Yeah. And there was a word that you used when we were first speaking that I loved, that I hadn't thought of, but it was ulterior motives.
Yeah.
When you said ulterior motives in relationships and business, And so I have an idea that you have me thinking of, but I'm curious, when you say that, could you share a little bit of what you mean when you say ulterior motives?
Yeah. So in relationships specifically, and I'll go into business and relationships because I see it in both. For people who have toxic relationship patterns, they continue to settle for far less than they want or deserve because they don't want to be alone, right? And so they continue to attract toxic people because their motive for a relationship is to soothe their loneliness, to feel good enough, to not be a single parent anymore, to have somebody save them. So their motive for a relationship is not genuine. It's not coming from a place of love and excitement and joy and passion. It's coming from a place of fear, lack, and quite literally using somebody to soothe their wounds instead of being genuine and using relationship and cultivating relationships for what they're really meant for, which is sacred. And so the same thing in business, the ulterior motive of signing clients, making more money is not to help people. It's to make themselves feel worthy, to be good enough, to make somebody like them, to prove something to mom and dad. So I see that a lot in both ways, coming from both sides. And what that does is that blocks your success in both areas. It blocks you from calling in a healthy, loving partner. And it also blocks you from being able to have a sustainable, healthy business.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's, I'll use what's the common word? That's juicy.
It's so juicy, right?
Right. Yeah, because it's interesting because I think that especially among entrepreneurs, I think what I notice, and even for myself, can get into stuff for the accomplishment, for the accolades, for all these things, and it's like this continual. I view entrepreneurship as like one of the most spiritual processes that there are in life, or just journeys. Yeah, because it's just this continual looking at oneself and having to be like, oh, these feelings are coming up because I'm making it mean XYZ, that I didn't make this money, or they didn't sign up, or maybe they did sign up, or I did get paid this, but then I'm unhappy right after, and I'm like, no, let me create the next thing again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so as you were talking, I was thinking of, I think especially entrepreneurs, they want to create, they want to do these things, and so it's almost like I'm thinking of someone creating. Like sometimes people can want like a really structured calendar, right, to like accomplish more. So they really structure their day and they say, I'm going to get all these things done. And what I perceive as the ulterior motive is I want to feel good once I've accomplished X, Y, Z, and yet they feel like they're like dragging themselves through their day.
Yeah.
And so it's always about the next accomplishment, where once they actually, recognize their own value, that they recognize their accomplishments, that their worth isn't based on those things, they actually start to feel a freedom where they are more productive because they have the space and the energy. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to structure my day and try and do all these things. They're actually just moving towards more of what they want, and it naturally starts to unfold and occur, like it's just part of their rhythm. What are different ways that I guess you see that? I mean, I'll pause there if there's more that you want to share from what I'm saying, but also what do you see in terms of like how these ulterior motives manifest?
Yeah, just like what you're saying in having this structure and feeling accomplished once they've done all these things. It's like that. I always say, like, when you feel good and have fun, everything comes to you. When you let go, like when you're creating all of this mental turmoil and anguish, and you're putting all of this pressure on yourself, you're exuding that kind of energy. You're exuding this lack energy, this not enoughness energy, and so you're going to continue to get that back. And so what I've taught myself and my clients is, when you feel good and have fun, everything you desire comes to you. Because when you are so kind of like reveling in the excitement and the love of helping a client, or when you're, just feeling so good about yourself that you're now ready to give love to somebody else instead of looking for them to fill that void. And the same thing in business is we're looking to fill that void, right? That accomplishment will fill the void, that client will fill the void, that money will fill the void. But what we come to find is after we have the client, the money, the relationship, the void's still there because it was never about filling it. Like, it's something that is very much internal. Like, nothing external can fill this void. Maybe, for a moment, but ultimately this void is coming within you, and it has to do with the way that we fill ourselves up, the way that we talk to ourselves, the way that we value ourselves. Because no matter what, like, once you get in that relationship, these people are always striving to get in a relationship, and then they get it, and then the relationship's a nightmare because they expect their partner to meet all their needs, or they expect, after they've reached a 50K 100K month, that they'll feel something different. But ultimately it wasn't about the money, it was about the feeling that the money would bring. And once that feeling went away, then what? Right.
Yeah. Wow. This is so good. When you're talking about the ulterior motives, and there's a few things here. Sometimes I like this idea when you talked about things being fun, because I recognize when people are operating off of the ulterior motive, sometimes it's like the way they can approach it is, okay, I'm going to have fun. What's the thing that I need to do to have fun? And it like becomes the serious thing. Whereas when they actually tune into, what's fun for them, or when I've spoken with clients about creating that fun, they can be looking through the lens of what is everyone else doing, or what is that fun, and what's fun for them might be out of the norm. And so in this theme of like valuing themselves, like that, I think is really what's helpful for them to tune into, like what they want is actually right there. In terms of what would be fun, what that would look like for them, and then that that fear of rejection or with that judgment probably pops in.
Yeah, it's probably never been safe for that person to fully express themselves or to learn about who they truly are at a core level, because maybe the way that they grew up, they had to be a certain way in order to earn love. And so they weren't ever allowed to fully express who they were, figure out what they liked, what they didn't like, what was fun for them, because they had all these conditions and stipulations to abide by. And so again, it's like that self-discovery of being really uncomfortable while getting comfortable with yourself. It's like we have to sit with ourselves. We have to face ourselves. I know a lot of entrepreneurs, they have this business that they use to avoid being with who they are, discovering who they are. And same with relationships. People get into relationships to avoid being with themselves because it wasn't safe. And so once they just do it, take the action to be with themselves, and when they're wanting to turn to work or other external things to fill the void, like sitting with that uncomfortableness, asking themselves what they want, what would I find fun? And I think, talking with a lot of my clients that I do, some self-discovery with them, and they've told me that it's really sad that they don't know who they are, what they want, what they would find exciting or fun for them, because they've put everyone else before themselves this whole time to avoid learning who they were. So it's all about taking that step and being uncomfortable while learning it.
Yeah, and I think that's amazing, and it ties into what you were speaking about before as well, of reframing and almost rewiring the way that they're speaking to themselves and speaking about themselves. Because in my experience, there was a shift, right? Because it can feel scary to essentially be like, it's a cultivating of self-expression and like a strengthening of self-expression that there, like you said, there's an element of, this is who I am, or this is what I like, or this is how I do things. And there may be people that might say, oh, that's corny, or there might be people that aren't a fan of it. And there are going to be people that are at peace with that or accept it. And I think the shift, at least when it occurred for me and still continues to occur, is this element of it's become much more important for me to like myself than to worry about whether others like me. And, I think coming from the other side before, the perception might have been like, oh, the people that do that are assholes or something, Yeah. And it's like, oh no, that's actually not true. They're just very comfortable with themselves. And they aren't unkind. They're just very solid in who they are. And so that's been a continual growth thing. And so what are some things that I guess you would share in terms of language and communication as they're in this process of how to, as they take this step and they move through that uncomfortability, what are the things that you'd say to look out for in their language?
To other people or to themselves?
To themselves.
I would say the language that they use to themselves is being able to recognize, what thoughts aren't actually theirs. If they're noticing that they're saying that they're not good enough, that they are saying that they have to reach X and then they'll be happy, needing to gain validation and doing things for that purpose, and noticing the kind of the inner critic, if you will, noticing that is not their own thoughts. That was a thought that probably came from somebody in their, earlier years that was very critical of them, or something along those lines. And we have those thoughts to essentially keep us safe, which sounds as twisted as it is. You have these critical thoughts to keep you safe, to keep you in your comfort zone. And so recognizing that you are not your thoughts, that those thoughts are not actually yours, and then having the power to, every time you notice this communication with yourself, this internal dialogue, that you begin to recognize that that's the ego talking, it's not yours, and then switching that thought to something more loving. So it's going to be all about switching it as it's happening to really retrain the brain, because as you have better feeling thoughts, the more better feeling thoughts that you'll have, you'll change those neural pathways in your brain to actually create more better feeling thoughts. And so if you can do that every time you notice a negative thought come up about yourself, that communication with yourself, then it will begin to change with that consistency.
Yeah. And what does that look like in terms of, because I'm just picturing someone, going around, they're kind of just like censoring, every thought, which I think can sometimes be what they know or is the original habit. What does catching the thought, look like, or when they have that awareness? What does that look like in a sense? Is it just like acknowledging themselves and then saying, what would be more useful? Yeah. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And so, what I've heard from myself and my clients is, like, oh, I'm such a failure, or I can't believe I messed that up, or what did I do wrong? And so in those moments when you notice these thoughts come up, you can say, oh, this is something that I'm learning. I'm not a failure. This is me learning a new skill, or this is me making an error so that I can do better next time. And so speaking to yourself in the way that you would like a young child is a good way to kind of censor yourself. Like, would I say this to my child? No. So what would you say to your child instead? I made this analogy to my client the other day. I was like, well, what if your son fell off his bike as he's learning to ride his bike? Would you tell him that he was an idiot and that he was a failure? No, you'd be like, oh my gosh, it's totally okay. You're just learning.
Mm-hmm.
So, so kind of looking at it in that light and saying, and every time you catch yourself, be like, would I talk to my kid this way? And then reframing it and saying, okay, how would I talk to my child if they were going through the same thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And I know it for some people it can be a little out there, right? The idea of this parts work, right? That there's like a part of ourselves and what might help this, I think, land I think for some people is these patterns were formed when we were much younger. And so that part or that pattern is, maybe it was formed when it was like, you were 7 or 5 or whenever it was. And so it's when we're having that reaction, it's not like the adult version of ourselves. It's the younger version and bringing that love to it that it probably didn't have. I feel like that's a whole other.
Yeah. Oh my God. We can talk about that for hours, but yes, 100%. And I 100% agree with you. And I think that that's a great way to explain it to somebody that doesn't quite know parts work or having, these other parts of ourselves.
Yeah. I think that's amazing. Perfect. I feel like we're in a really good spot here. We've spoken about the ulterior motives. We've spoken about rejection. We've spoken about boundaries. We've spoken about so many things, journal prompts, and really shifting their language and just the way that they speak to themselves. Is there anything that you would like to, I guess leave them off with, right? Of they're building their business, they're connecting with more people. They're really going to have a sense of if they're treating themselves well, if others are treating them well. Do you have any, I guess, parting words to help them in their journey?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I can say, being a business owner and a coach, is continue to not only learn who you are, but exude, the fullest expression of yourself, because you will continue to attract the right people when you do that. You will continue to attract the perfect clients. You'll continue to attract the perfect relationships if you just continuously be upfront about who you are, showing your personality, not shying away, and being confident in what you bring to the table. Everything, and adding in the fun, everything will fall into place when you can do that.
Cool. Perfect. Thank you so much for, just opening up, for sharing, and really providing guidance, because, relationships are a core part of life. They're a core part of business. And I'll make sure I put your information in the post. So I'll make sure I tag you. And do you have a website that you recommend they go to or anything like that?
Yeah, I do have a website, and I can send you that as well. It's called the line, or the website thing is really long, so I'll have that.
Cool.
I'll have that sent to you.
Perfect. And for those listening, if you want any more of these conversations, if you want to explore more of these, there's a new website that I made called givememygoodies.com. And we'll have more of these interviews. And there's also, if you're building your business, there's a free course in there for you that can help with that. And so, yeah, thank you so much, Morgan, and I appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for watching. Let us know what stood out the most for you from this. It's really helpful.